Would you like early access to my videos? Then consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you. The Golden Age of Arcades. Just saying those words brings back fond memories of quarter spent and wasted youth. Right smack in the middle of the phenomenon that was asteroids, and just before the mega phenomenon that was Pac-Man, an odd little game was released that turned the industry on its head. The name of the game was Gorf, the classic arcade shooter from 1981. What movie license was originally attached to this game? Who is Ms. Gorf and what does she have to do with our story? So hop in your ship and prime your blasters because this is the history of Gorf. The year is 1981 and programmer Jay Fenton is planning out his next arcade game. He had seen the success of Space Invaders and Galaxian, but didn't like how they were confined to a single screen. He was trying to think of a way to combine the two so that players would gravitate towards his game. He wanted to include multiple screens with multiple ways to play, which at that time was unheard of. He decided on 5 different screens, which would take a lot of careful planning to make everything work. To make everything fit, he shrunk everything down. In the arcade game Space Invaders, there are 55 enemies that descend. In his version, there are only 24. In the arcade game Galaxian, there are 46 enemies you have to take out. In his version, only 24. People will be drawn more to his game because they would essentially be getting 5 games in one. In late 1981, Midway released Gorf into the arcades. This is a fixed shooter that sees you patrol the bottom half of the screen while preventing the Gorfian Empire from taking over the world. There are 5 unique missions with 5 unique styles of play. You have to wipe out all the enemies on each stage to advance to the next. Once you complete all 5 stages, your rank increases and so does the difficulty as the game loops. The levels include Astro Battles, which is essentially a clone of Space Invaders only with less enemies to kill. Laser Attack, which is similar to Astro Battle only this time the enemies dive. Galaxians, which, believe it or not, is a clone of Galaxian. Unfortunately, every home version had this portion omitted due to licensing trouble. Space Warp. You're in a type of wormhole taking out all of the enemies. And the last stage is the flagship, where you have to destroy the force field and then take out the enemy ship. The character of Gorf was not created for this game, but was instead created 6 years earlier by David Nutting. He had developed a shooting game with one of the characters looking very similar to the Roadrunner. The Gorf character made his debut in this game. He wanted to name the game Roadrunner, but after Warner Brothers caught wind of it, they made him change the name to Desert Gun. This was one of the first games to give you the option of buying extra lives up front with the addition of more quarters. The game uses a pistol grip joystick similar to the one found in the arcade game Tron. Gorf stands for Galactic Orbiting Robot Force. It fits in perfectly with acronym-based space creatures such as ALF or Alien Life Force, ET or Extraterrestrial, and one-hit wonder UB-40. The name of Gorf is also Frog spelled backwards. Frog was the nickname of designer Jay Fenton. It was also suggested that this is the reason the title character bounces around the screen like a frog. Gorf started out as a tie-in game for Star Trek the Motion Picture. Miss Fenton told me that the reason it didn't go through was that she read the script and felt that the plot of the movie would not make a very good arcade game. Her boss David decided to include Space Invaders and Galaxian, and then they added the final 3 missions which would ultimately become Gorf. This is why the starship that you control resembles the USS Enterprise. This was one of the first games to feature digitized speech. I can recall going to Aladdin's castle and hearing this for the first time. The game utilized an SC-01 speech synthesis chip made by Vortex, and it taunted you with over 25 different phrases. A sequel was developed by Mr. Fenton called Ms. Gorf, but the company never released the game due to the great video game crash. Mr. Fenton still has uncompiled code on 8-inch floppy disks, She informed me that she would like to retrieve the game from storage and finish the game properly. The game was a great success in the arcades, and it prompted many home conversions. Only 2 of the home conversions featured digitized speech, and those were the Commodore 64 and VIC-20. Both of these required the speech synthesis add-on board. Also, due to Atari having the exclusive rights to the game Galaxian on all home consoles, all of the Galaxian's levels from the game were removed. So let's start out by taking a look at the Atari 2600 version. This is a decent conversion with most of the essential gameplay elements still intact. The graphics are recognizable, but some things are missing, such as the space field and other visual elements. The playability is good. Next up is the BBC Micro. Everything looks great with vivid colors and detailed sprites. The problem is, the enemy sprites don't resemble the arcade game. Perhaps they were advised to change them to avoid any legal trouble. Sound effects are adequate, but the playability feels like Gorf, and that's what counts. Up next is the VIC-20 version. This is the one I was most familiar with growing up because this was one of my first games I had for my VIC-20. If you like large, chunky like a monkey sprites, then this is the game for you. To be honest, only the player sprite is chunky. Everything else is well represented. Sound effects are good and the playability is excellent. Much better than the Qbert conversion I covered in my last video. The Atari 800 version is up next, but it feels like I stopped at the local crack house before I started playing this game. Everything looks good, but the speed is just way too fast. The graphics are nice and large, but they still have a lot of detail to them. The controls are only adequate though, and everything feels just a bit too stiff.
That's what she said.
The 5200 version is nearly identical. Up next is probably the best console version, which is the Colecovision version. Everything looks nice and crisp, with the star field looking particularly nice. The problem lies with the enemy sprites. Similar to the BBC, they were changed from the arcade version. Other than that, this is an excellent conversion with good sound effects and great playability. And the last one we're looking at is the Commodore 64 version. This is another excellent conversion, with the sprites looking very similar to the arcade game. It is missing the star field though, which definitely hurts. As I mentioned, this does support the Magic Voice speech module, which really does add to the game. Playability is very good. In 2006, released by hobbyist developer 3D Stooges Software Studios, a near-perfect arcade port of Gorf was released for the Atari Jaguar Cd. In 2010, an excellent homebrew port of Gorf was released for the Game Boy Advance, featuring updated visuals and even included the digitized voices. And that about wraps up my coverage of the arcade classic shooter Gorf. If you are a fan of Golden Age arcade shooters, you owe it to yourself to check out this early, innovative game. The game was way ahead of its time and deserves its spot in the Video Game Hall of Fame. A big thank you goes out to Gorf creator Jamie Fenton, who took time out of her busy schedule to speak to me about the making of this game. Thank you very much. If you like this video and want to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my content. It's the only way my channel can grow. Thanks for watching.